Valencia told me he is optimistic about the new future between the United States and Cuba.
We're talking about a historical moment after 54 years of diplomatic estrangement between the United States and Cuba. This is not just a fabulous moment for U.S. and Cuban relations, but we're talking about the entire Western Hemisphere. We're opening new embassies, but this by no means represent the lifting of embargo. That's going to be a longer battle in Congress now that Congress is ruled by the Republicans. So we're going to see an uphill battle. But I think as we are entering into a new phase of U.S.-Cuba relations, I think new things will arise absolutely in terms of economic trade and other sorts of cooperation.
What was and continues to be, I understand in some quarters, the chief concern here among Cuban exiles?
Well, there are a couple of them. We're talking about human rights violations. I think some Cubans protest that they don't have enough freedom of speech. I think you have the women in white, las damas de blanco in Spanish. I think some of them are arrested because they have been protesting against the measurements that the government have taken. Other concerns would be how this new chapter will affect the economy in the sense that whether Cuba is prepared to a new trade with the United States in terms of how the communication systems, how internet will...
Banking and internet.
So it will be interesting to see how the system will react to this.
And coming up a little later in this hour, we will ask Robert why relations with Cuba are critical for U.S. influence in Latin America. Relations with Cuba was a necessary political move.
The United States came to realize that you could not carry on with policies for 54 years that really haven't done anything to stop the Cuban Revolution, as they say. First of all, I think you also have to see the influence of Venezuela in the region. The United States have lost some clout in Latin America. Then you had this emerging figure of Hugo Chavez trying to influence the periphery of Latin America, including Cuba.
And there was a really close relationship between the Castro government and the Chavez government.
Correct. Not to mention that Venezuela was supplying oil to Cuba by way of Petrocaribe. Now Venezuela is undergoing a tremendous economic hardship. They don't have the same clout that they had years before. So of course the United States, I believe, took advantage of this moment and decided to enter a new phase in U.S.-Latin American relations, because let's not forget that every time Cuba was not invited to the Summit of the Americas, the Latin American countries, particularly those who are left-leaning, refused to sign any kind of agreement or any kind of letter that said, you know, we are...
That's Venezuela, that's Bolivia, and
Nicaragua. You have Ecuador, and to some extent you have Brazil, Argentina. It's a big cohort of left-leaning countries. And even the right-leaning ones, Colombia, Mexico, Peru, they all refuse the position of the United States not to include Cuba in this Summit of the Americas, because, you know, regardless of ideological differences, it's part of the Americas.
I have to ask you to talk about Colombia's role in this, in negotiations to end the decades of hostility between the government and the FARC rebels there.
Cuba is hosting the peace talks between the FARC rebels and the Santos administration, the Juan Manuel Santos administration, even though it's mired with controversy. Because the guerrillas have...
It has been,
And it has been, because they have committed some atrocities in Colombia. But Cuba has played a pivotal role in maintaining those conversations. And I think that was also one of the reasons why the United States decided to remove Cuba from the list of terrorist nations, or at least those countries that harbor terrorists. And Cuba has played an important role, both ideologically and in terms of logistics. And now they are hosting these peace talks. And I think that's one of the reasons why Cuba appended that decision.
And today, Senator John